There may be a dramatic turn in the Diddy case tomorrow when Kid Cudi takes the stand, but there may be something that happens that will prevent him from testifying. Well, the new developments in Diddy have to start with evidence that the jury has seen a lot of the evidence that was seized at the Star Island raid of Diddy's home, which is in the Miami area. But what was seized is, again, it is just hard for me to understand how the prosecution is trying to tie this to racketeering. And I think that's where they're going. And I got to tell you, here's some of what they seized. They seized baskets of baby oil, Astroglide, sex toys, high heels. They seized AR-15s. Well, that gets you somewhere, right? They have magazines with bullets, and some of the serial numbers were scratched out, not on the guns, but on the magazines themselves. So look, racketeering means that there is some kind of a criminal organization that Diddy is running, and that he is engaged in a variety of crimes. And I don't want to just say, think of the mafia, but that is the classic case. But it's got to be a crime organization. Baby oil, Astroglide? I mean, that's not racketeering. Even AR-15s. There are people who own AR-15s. And in some states, it's not legal, depending on the way they own them. But those are gun charges. That's not racketeering. And that's not interstate commerce of sex workers. So I'm not sure where that's getting prosecutors in the big picture. I just still am having trouble with this concept of racketeering. By the way, they seized cocaine and mushrooms and ketamine. Again, state crimes for sure. But a lot of people do cocaine and ketamine and mushrooms. That doesn't mean they're engaged in organized crime. There is a huge leap from saying people have mushrooms, do cocaine, and saying it's all part of an organized crime venture. You know, if Diddy were out selling cocaine as a front for a criminal organization, that's one thing. But that's not what they're alleging here. Okay. So then Dawn Hughes takes the stand. She is a forensic psychologist, and she is essentially talking about Stockholm Syndrome, which is something that really developed in the 90s, where you could have a domestic abuse victim who stays, who endures the beating, and feels as if they've done something wrong, that they can't leave, and maybe they feel they can't leave. And this is a whole psychological profile that Dawn Hughes tried to set up for the jury. Frankly, I thought a lot of people knew about this, because obviously what the prosecution is trying to show is that Cassie was in an 11-year relationship with Diddy. And, you know, given the abuse and everything else, why didn't she leave? Well, that was the point of Dawn Hughes getting on the stand, to talk about the fact that there are women who feel trapped, who realistically can't get out, who keep getting drawn back in. We have somebody in the courtroom, one of our producers, who said the jury was really interested in this testimony. There was a lot of eyebrow raising, and especially with the women, even when the lawyers went to sidebar, they were really interested in what was going on with Dawn Hughes. So it seems like prosecutors may have scored points with Dawn Hughes, especially with some of the jurors, and it seems the female jurors in particular. And this does go to the whole idea of consent, that, you know, if Cassie didn't leave, it seems she consented. Well, Dawn Hughes is there to say, look, just because you stay doesn't mean you consent. So I think the prosecution probably scored some points with her, with some of the jurors. So then George Kaplan takes the stand. George Kaplan is a former assistant of Diddy's from 2013 to 2015. And he talked about carrying drugs for Diddy in a Gucci bag, no less. So now we're dealing with two different designer bags of drugs. So carried drugs filled with Gucci bags, would sometimes buy drugs for Diddy. would set up hotel rooms for freak-offs, would then clean up the hotel rooms after the freak-offs. And, you know, that is what he did. And, and what, prosecutors, you're trying to show what? Is that organized crime? I don't see how that's organized crime. I mean, yes, he had an assistant who was facilitating freak-offs. So, I mean, if it's about interstate transportation, that seems kind of irrelevant. If it's about racketeering, I don't see how that's racketeering. I mean, you could make the argument, I suppose, that if some of the sex workers come from out of state and this guy is facilitating all of that, that's part of a criminal venture. That's not what racketeering is typically about. It feels like a stretch at best. And again, you know, I don't see how the jury is going to buy that this is evidence of racketeering. This is an assistant who says he worked, you know, 80 hours a week and he was worked to the bone and threatened. But he wasn't threatened with physical violence. He threatened his job every month, according to this guy. So, you know, I don't get it. I don't see where that goes. I want to talk about Kid Cudi. Kid Cudi may take the stand tomorrow, and he could be somebody really useful for prosecutors when it comes to racketeering. If Kid Cudi can somehow tie Diddy to the fact that his car was set on fire and that it essentially blew up, if Kid Cudi has evidence of that, that could be, I think, the best evidence so far in this trial that this was a criminal organization, that Diddy is sending people out to torch Kid Cudi's car because Diddy was jealous that Kid Cudi is dating Cassie. So I think that that could be real firepower for the prosecution. Problem is this. The defense made a passing comment this morning about hearsay and about Kid Cudi in particular. And what I know the defense is driving at, because this is pretty obvious, is that somebody who testifies about an incident like this has to be what we call in the law a percipient witness, somebody who has firsthand knowledge that I saw him torch my car, or I saw so-and-so torch the car. He told me he did X. That's direct knowledge. That is fair game in a trial. If Kid Cudi says, so-and-so told me that this happened, that's classic hearsay. And you can object, and that objection is generally sustained, meaning Kid Cudi can't talk about what somebody told him that Diddy did. That's the problem with hearsay in a criminal trial. And so it sounds to me like the defense is loaded for bear, that if Kid Cudi takes the stand and starts talking about what others said to him, if he doesn't have it directly, you are going to hear an instant objection before Cudi answers, and the jury may never get those answers. I don't know what Kid Cudi knows firsthand, but if it is hearsay, this may be very frustrating for prosecutors. We don't know exactly what it is, and frankly, I'm not even sure the defense knows what Kid Cudi is going to say. But it seems like they're ready to lunge on this hearsay point. Okay, the final thing I want to mention is the Punisher. The Punisher is Sheree Hayes. He is the guy who was the exotic dancer who went to the Trump International Hotel, the Essex House in New York, and some other hotels along the way in New York over a period of 3 years, and had sex with Cassie while Diddy watched. He went there initially because he was going to do a dance for Cassie for her birthday with Diddy watching. It turned into sex. They had him there 5 or 6 times a year for 3 years. So I talked to him today on TMZ Live, and I asked him something that I just was baffling me. And I just said, look, I don't understand why the prosecution called you, because I read your testimony, I read the transcript, and I wasn't seeing anything where Diddy pressured Cassie or coerced Cassie or forced Cassie. And I don't see where that got the prosecution with your testimony, either on racketeering or even on interstate commerce, because he is from Harlem and all of the encounters were in New York. So there was no interstate commerce, which means the prosecution didn't have jurisdiction to file against Diddy for what he did, because he was all local, he was all New York. So I said, help me out here. I said, I don't get it, I don't understand. And his answer was, neither do I. He said, I don't know why they called me. And he said, as a matter of fact, he said, honestly, I thought my testimony actually helped the defense because I couldn't really testify to anything about coercion or force or anything like that. You know, at times she would wince, but I never thought of that as coercion. And so I said, well, did prosecutors tell you why they were calling you? And he said, no. He said, they listened to my story and they called me to the stand and I told my story. And I was surprised, frankly, that he was surprised, because I thought maybe I missed something, and maybe I did, but even he does not understand why he was called. And he actually thinks whatever he said ultimately showed a consensual tryst between him, Cassie, and Diddy. Okay, so tomorrow, Kid Cudi. This could be big for the prosecution, or it could be frustrating, so stay tuned.